Joined us down the line from central London. Matthew, very good afternoon to you. You have been studying and looking at Chinese-UK relations and indeed relations with China with lots of the rest of the world for a long time now. Why do you think Sir Keir Starmer has deliberately made this move today to meet with Xi Jinping?
Well, thanks for having me, Darren. I mean, I think the reality is, China is one of the great powers, and so is the UK. And it makes a lot of sense for them to speak with one another clearly and directly. We're obviously in a period of competition economically and on national security issues. And obviously there's big issues between the UK and China, whether it's trade or human rights or national security. But having that dialogue is important. It's a new opportunity for a new prime minister to reset the stage, reset the dialogue, and look for wins where they're possible. But I think, needing to be clear-eyed about the reality of the situation as he enters that dynamic.
But is, frankly, Matthew, the reality of the situation is that the UK government want to see economic growth, and frankly, China's an opportunity.
Absolutely. Trade between China and the UK exported 33 billion last year, up from 20 billion in 2016. And, that's a huge increase in a period where the relationships were fraught. So I think if you're the UK government, particularly the Treasury, you're thinking if we improve the relationship just a little bit, that economic export and those, generated revenues could increase substantially.
In saying that, you look at China and the golden era that we heard from before that didn't really, frankly, amount to very much when David Cameron and George Osborne were in charge. How do you think China views the UK? Does it still view it as a major world player? I mean, almost certainly not. So how does it view it?
That's a very good question. I think it looks at it as a additional pole of influence and global power. Obviously not in the EU anymore, so can't influence EU policymaking. With a very different government here in the UK than there is in the United States, at least coming in with the Trump administration. I think it likely views the UK as a separate piece, where a separate negotiation and a separate arrangement and a separate relationship can be developed. And the UK could be played off of its neighbors and friends in the EU and the US. And I think it's looking to have that standalone relationship where it can maximize those differences where necessary from China's interests.
And you talked there about, the UK and its kind of relationship with the EU, but also its relationship with the United States. Let's be honest about that. And, clearly China-US relations are going to be pretty interesting over the next 4 years. Has the UK got any role in that, or simply China and the United States going to do what they're going to do, frankly?
Well, I would expect the US and the UK to stay aligned on the national security issues when it comes to China. I don't think you're going to have a change of policy in the UK. And frankly, the US policy is not going to change substantially. How that policy is implemented by the Trump administration versus the Biden administration, there will be some changes. But China policy in the US is one of the few areas of pretty bipartisan consensus. So I don't expect you'll see a lot of daylight between the US and the UK when it comes to national security. Trade may be one of those areas, particularly Chinese involvement in infrastructure in the UK and those type of investments. But again, I don't think the UK is going to give away the store when it comes to national security type investments. Please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, very finally, Matthew, then, I mean, is this just an incremental change? This is not a new dawn for UK-China relations. Is that ultimately what you're trying to say? Is that
absolutely. I don't see a major shift. I think if UK gets lucky and is able to export 20% more or 10% more, great. But I don't see a major sea change in policy. I think the big change is just that we're going to start talking to each other more. And as Joe Biden said yesterday down at the APEC meeting, the theme is competition, not conflict. And I think the UK is falling in that bucket.
Okay.
Cooperate where we can.
Really good stuff, Matthew. As always, thank you very much indeed for your time. That's Matthew Orsma there, International Trade and Global Policy Attorney and Managing Partner at Philsbury, Winthrop, Shaw Pittman. Thank you very much, Matthew, for your time. Now, the Environment Secretary is due to meet with the President of the National Farmers Union this evening ahead of what is expected to be big demonstrations in London tomorrow. Farmers are due to protest against what they say are completely unacceptable changes to inheritance tax. The government says the changes are fair and balanced and will only affect 500 estates a year, with small family farms unaffected. Well, it gets the thought now of two farmers. Joining me is Emily Norton, who's based in Norfolk, and Freya Morgan, an arable farmer and the National Farmers Union's Bedfordshire County Chair. Freya, let's start with you if we can. This meeting is taking place this evening with ministers. What's your concern? I mean, the government are reiterating again today that only a small number of farmers will be affected by this every year.
We at the NFU think that the Treasury's got the wrong figures. They've based their data on 1 year's APR claims, which actually includes a high number of small holdings that are not actually farms or producing food. And also, the historical APR claims don't accurately represent the impact on family farms and affiliated businesses because they're only using half of the farm value. APR would only be on the land, and then the BPR claim would cover the machinery and livestock costs, which are actually all assets to the farmers.
Emily, as far as I'm aware, that you're a bit more relaxed about all of this. You don't think it's necessarily going to be as difficult or as troublesome as the NFU and others are making out?
There's certainly going to be a period of pain as we learn to adjust to these new rules. Up until budget day, all of the planning for anybody who was a land-owning farmer was that they needed to die on the farm in order to be able to pass their assets on tax-free to the next generation. As of that Wednesday, a couple of weeks ago, those plans have changed. I think there are advantages to those changes in terms of assets being passed on to the next generation sooner, in terms of succession conversations happening at an earlier stage. But I think that there are going to be farmers who are negatively impacted unfairly because the changes are being brought in with a relatively short time frame, and some farmers won't have time to change their plans.
So there you have it, Freya. I mean, there are some benefits to this. Do you accept that?
Yes, I do get that. But the APR and BPR are not actually tax loopholes. They were a policy brought in by the government in 1984 to protect small farms and family farm businesses being sold and broken up. And this is what the new government are implementing, will create that and go against that policy that was actually introduced. There will be opportunities because I think businesses need to sit down and actually look at the next generation and the succession planning. But we as a farm, we're a small family farm, but we've diversified into farming land for other small family farms that are actually not viable. So they would be hit, we would be hit, and then there would be a lack of actually sort of farmers and the next generation coming in to produce the food that we eat in this country and supporting a £148 billion business in the manufacturing sector for food and drink.
But Fred, there'll be a lot of people watching at home going, well, there are a lot of other businesses who don't have succession plans in terms of passing it down to the family. Why should farming view itself any differently from the thousands, tens of thousands of other businesses that operate in this country?
Well, on average, a farmer's return on investment is less than 1%. I don't think there's many businesses which would actually survive at that.
Is that not a sign that those? Is that a sign though that those farms are then badly run?
No, we've been doing the best we can. Basically, we are not paid a fair price for our commodities. We're price takers, not price makers, and our input costs have gone up by 44% since 2019.
Emily, when you see the fact that farmers are protesting tomorrow, and there's talk about these protests being quite big, do you support them, or do you kind of wish that farmers would just sit down and maybe talk this through, if you like?
I can understand why farmers feel like everything is against them. It's part of the farming mindset to feel that you're working very hard for very little return. And quite often it's because they say we love the job. Now, loving the job is not really a negotiating position in a business sense of the word. And it does mean that that kind of capital base, that base that sits underneath our food system has been exploited, but it's been exploited for the general benefit of this country in terms of enabling sort of a cheap food economy and the vast majority of consumers to be able to access food at a sensible price point for them. Now, what we're doing here is loading more risk onto farming businesses, and that risk needs to be taken on somewhere else. It needs to be accepted within supply chains, most likely. So what really needs to happen is a more progressive, more forward-looking conversation about how farmers work with their supply chains, and not this kind of, I think, slightly defensive argument about family farms, because there are lots of other different farming structures that produce awful lot of goods, whether it's institutional ownership right the way through to community supported agriculture. We're talking about land owning family business structures only. That broader conversation around how we support a cheap food economy in this country and where we get our food from and how, I think that's the kind of conversation we need to be leading into if we're going to get the economic growth that we're after.
OK, and just quickly in one word, Free, if you can, are you going to be on the protest tomorrow, or do you know people who are? How big is it going to be?
Yes, I'm going to be lobbying MPs in Westminster, and I will be joining the march. And I think there's more and more momentum gaining for the march, and talking to other farmers and farm shop owners, there will be quite a few of the general public going along to support the farming fraternity.
OK, Freya and Emily, thank you very much indeed for your time. Really appreciate that. And of course, there'll be full coverage of this issue on Sky tomorrow. We're going to pause, though. At the moment, we're going to take you to the House of Commons. Louise Haigh, the Transport Secretary, is updating MPs on the government's plans for bus funding. Let's have a quick listen in.
Including funding a long-standing grant to drive down fares and drive up services. In many places, this is record investment. And every region, every authority in England will benefit, especially those areas historically underserved, like rural areas and small towns. Yeah. Councils such as Leicester, the Isle of Wight, Torbay and Cambridgeshire will see unprecedented levels of funding for services. At-risk routes will be saved and passengers will see faster, more reliable journeys. We're also putting money into safer bus stops and more accessible passenger information, so our bus sector is fit for everyone. And I'm delighted that Metro mayors have welcomed this announcement, with city regions such as Greater Manchester, West Yorkshire and Liverpool receiving some of the biggest allocations. But this isn't all. We're also committing over £150 million to cap bus fares at £3, ensuring passengers don't face a cliff edge of higher prices from next year's, particularly in rural areas where buses are a lifeline. The current fare cap was only funded until 31st of December, meaning that without the action we are taking, some fares would have risen by 80%. We weren't going to let that happen. We're investing to keep fares down and putting money back in people's pockets and provide more frequent services so more people can get to more places, more times of the day. Madam Deputy Speaker, we're not only a pro-investment government, we're a pro-reforming government too. Yeah. And we will not hesitate to overhaul parts of the system that simply aren't working for passengers. If that means changes to how we allocate resources, we will make them. If passengers' needs aren't being met, we will prioritise them. And if laws are needed, we will introduce them. So we've called time on the way bus funding has historically been allocated. Previously, the government made councils compete for funding, wasting resources and delaying decisions. It was overly complicated, led to inconsistent funding and created uncertainty for authorities and operators. We are taking a fundamentally different approach. We have allocated funding based on local need, population, the distance buses travel and levels of deprivation. This puts fairness at the heart of future funding and ends the postcode lottery on bus services. Yeah. It ensures taxpayer money goes to the areas in most need, where it will have the most impact and where passengers will most benefit. This is the first stop on our journey to support local areas to take back control of services and deliver better buses across the country. Finally, we will introduce our landmark buses bill in the
There you go, that's the
weeks.
Transport Secretary Louise
It is the
Haigh
biggest
in the
shake-up of
Commons
the
this
sector
afternoon,
for 40
spelling
years.
out
It will allow
funding
councils across the country
to buses
to
and
adopt
bus services
franchising
across
models, as in Greater
England.
Manchester and London.
We all know that the
That
price
means
cap
local
on those
leaders
bus fares
taking
is
back
due to
control
increase
of
at the start of next year to
ensuring
£3.
routes, fares
So that
and
is
timetables
the Transport
are all
Secretary
geared
spelling out the
towards
details
local
there in
passenger
the
needs.
House of Commons.
This model works.
OK, you're watching Business Live here on Sky News. We're going to take a quick break. Coming up next, we'll be looking at the markets. As you can see, the FTSE up just over 0.5% this afternoon. We'll have all the details on why in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland Correspondent. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirmed that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Lough Neagh. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. Sky News, the full story first.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Very welcome back. Let's take a look at the markets on this Monday afternoon. And the Wall Street has rallied as it braces for major earnings report in the United States this week. Tesla spearheaded the tech-heavy Nasdaq's rally, up 1% amid reports that Trump's team is working on ways to ease regulation when it comes to self-driving vehicles. Over here in Europe, on the continent, markets were mixed on the close, with investors turning their attention to regional inflation data. And in London, the FTSE closed up just over 0.5%. Have a look at the foreign currencies. As you can see, sterling has done a bit better today, up against the dollar at 127 and the euro at 120. Dollar's done pretty well in the last couple of weeks. And finally, oil prices have edged up today, partly in the news that the output of Norway's Johan Sverdrup oil field has been halted. A barrel of Brent crude oil is up nearly 3% at $73 a barrel. Well, joining me now is George Lagarius, who is a good friend of the programme and joins us live from Athens this afternoon. Very good afternoon to you, George. Let's start with the European markets. A bit of a mixed bag this afternoon. Talk us through why.
The long and short of it is that European stocks are not particularly loved these days. So in the past 2 months or so, European stocks have been underperforming, but in the past 2 months, we have seen vast underperformance. Since the beginning of 2023, European stocks have gained 22% in dollar terms, and US stocks have gained 58% or thereabouts in same currency terms. So markets don't love Europe. Why? Because they feel it is the target for the new administration's possible tariffs. And they're taking money out of European risk assets and putting it into dollar assets.
Well, talking about dollar assets, one thing that has been doing incredibly well in recent weeks is the US dollar. Sterling and the euro have clawed back a little this afternoon, but the dollar has really strengthened, particularly since Trump's re-election, a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, so look, it is expected. They expect that Mr. Trump will foster growth with more fiscal expansion, which leads to higher inflation, which leads to higher interest rates. So it's the interest rate expectations that have pulled up. Having said that, you do not reindustrialize the US North with a strong dollar. And people who invest should have this on the back of their minds, that the core of the incoming administration's practices may be dollar weak.
Let's talk about Nvidia, because we're expecting results, aren't we, soon? What's your thought process about how that's likely to play out, George?
So Nvidia is really the backbone of the market right now. The market is trading on very frothy, I could say near bubbly valuations. And this depends on one thing. Companies like Nvidia, 2 or 3 companies like Nvidia, being able to double their earnings, Nvidia especially, every year or so. Between this quarter and next quarter, they're roughly expected to double both revenue and net income. So as long as they keep doing this, the market can keep trading at very high valuations. If they fail even a little bit, you could see a correction, which, by the way, might be a little bit long overdue.
And let's just finally talk about deregulation. I was talking there about Tesla shares, again up with an expectation on driverless cars, which we know Elon Musk has been looking at for quite a while now. And also bank deregulation as well could boost the big banks.
With government debt to GDP at unsustainable levels across the board, especially in the US and France for that matter, there is one silver bullet: to use the banks to generate more credit and generate more growth. This means that there's still debt to drive the economy, but it doesn't go through the government balance sheet, it goes more to the private sector. And it is a cycle and a game we played time and time again. It does lead to higher risks in the banking sector, but ultimately, that was also long overdue. I suspect it would have happened if Mr. Trump had stayed the second term.
And just very finally on that then, how does that play into these suggestions and concerns among some that Trump could get involved in the biggest bank of them all, the Fed Reserve?
Well, it's a different bag. Mr. Trump has a long animus, not for the Fed itself, but rather big institutions that act independent of the government, and especially when he would be leading it. So it is a very big probability that he might attack the Fed's independence. And there's a practical reason to do so as well. He would want lower rates to foster growth. So, the Fed would act independently and hike rates if they see more growth to keep inflation in check.
Okay. Well, we will have to wait and see. George, as always, really appreciate your time this afternoon. George Lagarius, so thank you very much indeed. That's it from me on Business Live for today. Back, of course, at 11:30 tomorrow morning. Do join me then. Up next, it's Mark Austin and the News Hour.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.